A pile of dry leaves, brown, brittle, curling at the edges. The kind of thing you rake into a corner every autumn and either bag for the garbage truck or set alight on a Sunday afternoon. Smoke rising into the gray sky. The satisfying crunch as it burns down to nothing. Gone. Done. Now, picture this instead. That same pile, 8 months later, transformed into something dark and crumbly and rich with the smell of earth after rain. Something you could hold in your hands and know, feel in your bones, that this is alive. That this is what your soil has been starving for. Most people choose the first option. They burn their dry leaves without a second thought, because that's what everyone does. Because it looks like garbage. Because nobody ever told them what they were actually throwing away. But here's the thing. Those dry leaves you've been torching every single year. They're one of the most powerful, freely available soil-building materials on the planet. And the fact that you've been destroying them instead of using them isn't your fault. It's just what happens when 1,000 years of agricultural wisdom gets quietly replaced by a bag of synthetic fertilizer and a glossy label. Stay with me, because what I'm about to walk you through is going to change the way you look at every pile of leaves you ever see again. Not just what to do with them, but why they work. What's actually happening at the microscopic level when you compost carbon-rich material like dry leaves, and how the world's most productive gardeners have been leveraging this knowledge for centuries, while the rest of us were busy buying things we didn't need. But first, let's talk about the problem, because there is one, and it's bigger than most people realize. Every year in the United States alone, yard waste accounts for roughly 35 million tons of material sent to landfills. That's according to the EPA's own data, 35 million tons. Of that, a significant portion is leaves, carbon-rich, nutrient-cycling, biologically active material that took an entire growing season to produce. Leaves that trees spent months synthesizing from sunlight, water, and soil nutrients. And we're stuffing them into plastic bags and shipping them to decompose in an oxygen-deprived hole in the ground, where they'll release methane instead of feeding the soil. Think about what that means for a moment. A single large oak tree can drop somewhere between 200 and 500 pounds of leaves in an autumn. One tree. And those leaves contain locked-up carbon, trace minerals drawn up from deep in the subsoil, and the structural compounds that soil organisms, the bacteria, the fungi, the millipedes and springtails and earthworms, depend on to build the architecture of living soil. We're not just discarding waste, we're discarding the raw material of fertility itself. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. Go into any garden center in October, November, in the weeks when leaves are falling everywhere. What do you see on the shelves? Bags of compost, bags of leaf mold, bags of soil amendment. Products being sold for $12, $18, $25 a bag. Often made from the very same leaf material that millions of homeowners are simultaneously paying to have removed from their properties. There is an entire industry selling you back the thing you threw away, and the only way that industry exists is if you don't know what you have. I'm not saying there's a conspiracy. I'm saying there's a very logical economic reason why no one put a commercial in front of your face telling you how to compost your own leaves into garden gold. There's no profit margin in free. So let me tell you about what dry leaves actually are, and where the knowledge of using them properly comes from. Because this isn't new, not even close. The practice of deliberately composting high-carbon plant material, what farmers and soil scientists now call brown material or carbon material, traces back at least 4,000 years to ancient Chinese agricultural manuscripts. Specifically, a text called the Fan Shengji Shu, written during the Western Han Dynasty around 100 BCE, describes in detail how decayed plant matter and composted organic material dramatically increased the yield of millet and wheat. The Chinese farmers of that era weren't just recycling. They understood intuitively what modern soil science has only confirmed in the last 100 years, that carbon is the scaffolding of all soil life. But the story gets more interesting than ancient China. Jump forward to the 18th century Europe, specifically to a British chemist named Arthur Young, who spent years documenting traditional farming practices across France and Italy in the 1770s. Young noticed something that puzzled him. The peasant farmers of northern Italy, poor farmers, working exhausted soil on difficult terrain, were producing yields that rivaled the wealthiest English estates. Their secret wasn't exotic. They were composting everything: leaves, straw, wood shavings, animal bedding, all of it piled, turned, and worked back into the ground. Young wrote about it with a kind of exasperated admiration. He could see it worked. He just didn't fully understand why. We understand why now. And it comes down to two things that I want to explain carefully, because once you understand them, the whole picture clicks into place. The first is the carbon-to-nitrogen ratio. The second is fungal mycelium and the biological web it creates. Let's start with carbon and nitrogen, because this is probably the most misunderstood principle in home composting. And getting it wrong is exactly why so many people's compost piles fail, why they end up with slimy, smelly heaps instead of rich, crumbly humus. Every organic material has a ratio of carbon atoms to nitrogen atoms. Scientists write this as C to N. Fresh grass clippings might have a C to N ratio of about 15 to 1, meaning 15 parts carbon for every 1 part nitrogen. Dry autumn leaves, on the other hand, have a C to N ratio somewhere between 40 to 1 and 80 to 1, depending on the species. Oak leaves can go even higher. And here's the thing people get backwards. High carbon isn't bad. It's not poor material. It's actually the structural backbone that makes compost work at all. Think of your compost pile like a kitchen. The microorganisms doing the decomposition, primarily bacteria and fungi, need both carbon and nitrogen to do their job. Carbon is their energy source. It's the fuel they burn. Nitrogen is their protein. It's what they use to build their own cell structures and reproduce. Without enough nitrogen, decomposition stalls. The pile just sits there. But without enough carbon, the nitrogen burns off too fast as ammonia gas. That sharp smell you sometimes get from a pile that's too heavy on green material. The microbes have nothing to work with. The pile turns anaerobic, drops in temperature, and starts rotting instead of composting. Dry leaves, with their high carbon content, are exactly what a compost pile needs to balance out the nitrogen-heavy materials most gardeners have too much of. Kitchen scraps, fresh grass clippings, coffee grounds. The classic composting ratio that produces fast, hot, efficient decomposition is somewhere around 25 to 1 to 30 to 1 overall. And the way you hit that sweet spot? You combine your high nitrogen greens with your high carbon browns. Your dry leaves are your browns. They are, in many ways, the most important ingredient you have. And I'll reveal in a moment exactly how to build a pile using leaves that produces finished compost in as little as 6 to 8 weeks, even in cooler climates. But first, let me tell you about the other mechanism, the one that blew my mind when I first learned about it: fungi. Specifically, the white thread-like structures called mycelium that grow through decaying leaf material like slow-motion lightning through clouds. When you look at a pile of leaves that's been sitting for a few months, you might notice white or grayish threads running through the darker material underneath. Most people see that and think their pile has gone moldy, gone wrong somehow. It hasn't. What you're seeing is fungal mycelium at work, and it is one of the most productive decomposition forces in nature. Here's how it works. Fungi don't digest material the way bacteria do. From the inside out, once they've colonized a cell, fungi extend these physical threads, the mycelium, outward through the material, secreting enzymes ahead of themselves that break down the complex carbon compounds in leaf cell walls, compounds called lignin and cellulose that bacteria struggle to process at all. Lignin is the stuff that makes wood hard. It's extraordinarily resistant to decomposition. Bacteria alone can take years to break it down. Fungi can do it in months. And as they do, they're releasing the locked-up nutrients inside the leaf structure: calcium, magnesium, potassium, manganese. all the trace minerals the tree drew up from deep soil and incorporated into those leaves over the growing season. But here's the part that surprises most people. The mycelium doesn't just decompose, it connects. As fungal threads extend through your compost pile and eventually into your garden soil, they form a network, sometimes called the wood wide web in forest ecology research, that physically links soil particles together, creating a stable, porous structure called aggregate. This aggregate structure is what gives healthy soil its ability to hold water while draining excess. It's what creates the crumbly, loose texture that lets plant roots penetrate easily. A soil with well-developed fungal structure can hold significantly more water than compacted, biologically depleted soil. Some research suggests up to 20 times more in certain extreme comparisons. And you build that structure by feeding the fungi. And you feed the fungi by giving them high-carbon material, dry leaves. Have you ever tried composting leaves before? I'm genuinely curious. If you have, drop a comment below and tell me what worked and what didn't, because the details matter enormously. And I've heard from people who spent years doing this wrong before someone finally explained the mechanism. Let me give you one more piece of science before we get to the practical steps, because this one reframes everything. There's a compound produced during the decomposition of leaf litter called humic acid. It sounds technical, but the concept is simple. Humic acid is a long-chain carbon molecule that forms when organic matter, particularly high-carbon material like leaves, decomposes completely over time. And humic acid has a remarkable property. It has what chemists call a high cation exchange capacity, or CEC. In plain English, this means it acts like a molecular sponge that attracts and holds positively charged mineral ions, things like calcium, magnesium, and potassium, and keeps them available at the root zone instead of letting them leach out with rainfall. Most synthetic fertilizers don't build humic acid. They deliver soluble nutrients that are immediately available, yes, but they also leach easily, require reapplication constantly, and do nothing to improve the soil structure underneath. A bag of nitrogen fertilizer is like a sugar rush for your plants. Leaf compost, properly made, is like rebuilding the metabolic system from scratch. The results take longer to see, but they compound, they accumulate. A garden soil enriched with leaf compost year after year gets measurably better every season, not because you're adding more and more, but because you're building a biological infrastructure that maintains and multiplies fertility on its own. There's a trial I want to mention from the Rodale Institute, one of the most rigorously documented long-term agricultural research centers in the United States. Their farming systems trial, running since 1981, has consistently shown that organic systems that rely on composted organic matter rather than synthetic inputs, match or exceed the yield of conventional systems after a transition period of about 3 to 5 years. What's most striking isn't the final yield comparison. It's the soil data. The organic plots show significantly higher soil organic matter, better water retention during drought years, and stronger microbial biomass across every year of the trial. They're not just growing food, they're growing soil. That's what you're doing when you compost your leaves instead of burning them. You're growing soil. It's a different frame, and once you see it that way, torching a pile of dry leaves starts to feel like burning money. All right, here's exactly how you do it. You don't need any special equipment to start, though there are upgrades worth considering if you want to move faster. The most basic setup is just a corner of your yard and a pile. But let me walk you through what actually works. Because most people get the fundamentals wrong in 2 or 3 places, and those mistakes are what turn leaf composting from a revelation into a frustrating heap of nothing. First, the materials. You need dry leaves, your raw carbon source. You need a nitrogen material. Fresh grass clippings work perfectly, as do kitchen scraps like vegetable peels and fruit waste, coffee grounds, or even a shovelful of finished compost or garden soil from last season to introduce the microbial community. That last one is optional, but speeds things up noticeably. You need water. And you need either a physical space of at least 3 feet by 3 feet or a simple bin structure. Even 4 wooden pallets wired together in a square works beautifully and costs almost nothing. Start by shredding your leaves if you can. This is probably the single most impactful thing you can do to accelerate the composting process, and it's the step most beginners skip. Whole leaves tend to mat down into dense, waterproof layers that block airflow and moisture penetration. Shredded leaves dramatically increase the surface area available for microbial and fungal colonization. You can shred leaves by running your lawnmower over them a few times, or by vacuuming them with a leaf blower that has a shredder function. Even stuffing them into a garbage bin and running a string trimmer into the top for 30 seconds works fine. Once you have shredded leaves, build your pile in layers. Alternate roughly 3 to 4 inches of leaves with 1 to 2 inches of nitrogen material. Wet each layer as you build. The moisture content matters more than most people think. The pile should feel about as damp as a wrung-out sponge. Not soaking, not dry. Somewhere between. If you squeeze a handful and get a few drops of water, you're right. If nothing comes out, the pile is too dry. If water streams out freely, it's too wet and needs more dry leaf material added to balance it. The pile needs to reach a minimum volume of about 1 cubic yard, 3 feet in every direction, to generate and retain enough heat for active decomposition. This is where a lot of beginners go wrong. They make small piles. A pile that's 1 foot wide and 2 feet tall will decompose eventually, but it won't heat up, which means it won't kill weed seeds, won't break down as fast, and won't develop the same biological complexity as a properly sized hot compost pile. If you build it right, properly sized shredded leaves, balanced carbon to nitrogen ratio, adequate moisture, your pile will heat up within 2 to 3 days. You'll be able to feel it with your hand at the center. It might reach 140 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit in the core, which is hot enough to kill most pathogens and weed seeds. At that point, your job is to turn it. Every 3 to 5 days, take the outside material and move it to the inside. This reintroduces oxygen, which the aerobic bacteria need to keep working, and it brings the less decomposed outer material into the hot zone. Most people get this wrong because they turn the pile once, see that it's already looking darker, and decide it's done. It's not done. Turn it consistently for 6 to 8 weeks, and what you'll end up with at the center of that pile is something that smells like a forest floor. Earthy, clean, slightly sweet, dark brown to black, crumbly in your hands. That's finished leaf compost, and a cubic yard of the stuff is worth more to your garden than anything you'll find in a bag at a garden center. Now, if you're an experienced composter looking for an upgrade, here's a variation worth considering. It's sometimes called the no-turn cold compost method, and it's better suited to large quantities of leaves that you want to process slowly over winter. Instead of a hot pile, you build a large, loose mound of shredded leaves, as big as you have material for, and you inoculate it with a layer of finished compost or aged wood chip mulch that already contains a developed fungal community. Then you leave it. Don't turn it, don't monitor it. Just let the fungi do their work slowly through the cold months. By spring, the bottom 2/3 of that pile will have transformed into something called leaf mold, a dark, spongy, moisture-retaining material that is arguably even better than compost for certain applications. Leaf mold doesn't have the nutrient density of hot compost, but its water-holding capacity is extraordinary. It can hold up to 500% of its own weight in water. Used as a mulch or mixed into seed-starting soil, it's exceptional. For those in hot, dry climates where decomposition happens faster, but moisture retention is more critical, Southeast Asia, the Mediterranean, the American Southwest, leaf mold mixed into your planting beds before the dry season is genuinely transformative. So, what actually happens after you start doing this? Let me walk you through the timeline, because the early stages can be confusing if you don't know what to look for. In the first week, your well-built pile heats up noticeably. You might see steam rising from it on a cool morning. The leaves in the center start to darken and compact slightly. This is bacterial activity ramping up. The fast-working aerobic bacteria colonizing the nitrogen-rich material first and generating heat as a byproduct of their metabolic processes. By week 2, if you turn the pile, you'll notice the outside is still relatively dry and unchanged, while the inside looks completely different. Darker, denser, beginning to lose the distinct leaf structure. This contrast is normal. It's why turning matters. You're bringing uncolonized material into the active zone. Around weeks 4 to 6, if conditions have been consistent, you'll notice the temperature in the pile starts to drop. This isn't failure. This is the bacterial phase completing and the fungal phase taking over. The pile will feel cooler to the touch. But look inside, and you'll see those white threads, the mycelium, beginning to weave through the material. The smell shifts from sharp and fermented to something earthier, greener, more complex. This transition phase often worries new composters. It shouldn't. The fungi are doing the work the bacteria can't. By month 2, you'll have 2 distinct layers: finished compost at the center and bottom, rougher partially composted material toward the outside. Harvest the finished material from the middle and use it as a top dressing on your beds, worked into planting holes, or mixed into potting soil. Put the rough outer material back into a new pile as the start of your next batch. Here's the connection back to everything I said earlier about why this matters. That garden soil you're building right now, you're not just feeding this year's plants. You're building a structure that will make next year's soil better, and the year after that better still. You're doing something that no synthetic fertilizer can replicate, no matter how clever the marketing is. You're rebuilding biological capital. There's a particular moment I want you to hold on to. It's the moment, maybe month 3, maybe month 6, depending on your climate, when you push a trowel into a bed you've been amending with leaf compost, and the soil gives way without resistance. When you pull the trowel out and the earth falls back crumbly and dark, instead of hard and gray and compacted. When you notice that the earthworms have found it, and there are 4 or 5 of them in a single trowelful, when before there were none. That moment is not just gardening. That moment is the result of choosing to understand what you have instead of being told to throw it away. It's the result of not burning what your land gives you. Every pile of dry leaves you've ever torched was a conversation your soil was trying to have with you that got cut short before it could say anything. You have the knowledge now. Share this with someone in your life who still bags their leaves every autumn, because there's a good chance they've never heard any of this. And a single season of putting it into practice could change how they garden for the rest of their lives. And if this kind of thinking, rediscovering what works, rebuilding from the ground up, choosing fertility over dependency, if that resonates with you, then subscribe. Because in the next video, I'm going to reveal something even more counterintuitive than this. A specific ancient soil practice that was deliberately discontinued in the 20th century, not because it stopped working, but because it couldn't be patented. And what it produced is still sitting in the soil profiles of ruins that are over 2,000 years old. We're just getting started.